Hi folks, my name is Brady and we are back with another React watch-along analysis thing. I've grown a little less fond of the word React in my titles, so I may end up working on that and trying to find a different title format. I like to have a consistent format, so when you're scrolling through the subscription feed, you see familiar stuff, and that makes it easier to spot one of my videos, because I know a lot of you're probably subscribed to like tons of people, so it's very easy to miss like one video every once in a while, especially if it's not what you're used to getting from a certain creator. But I do want to try reworking and perhaps simplifying my titles a little bit, so look out for something slightly different from before. It's such a minor change, but there's the programming note at the beginning of this video. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. So today I wanted to go to the primary sources. I thought that would be really cool. I don't really get to do that in a lot of my videos, with this being like a one take checking this stuff out for the first time sort of video. I don't really do that with any of the stuff that I typically study, because a lot of that is pre-video. A lot of it's pre-photography even. So there's not a lot when it comes to visuals and stuff like that to play with that stuff. I would have to create them myself, and that doesn't really work for this particular video format. But I do have a soft spot for the 60s, so I thought if I'm going to be going to some of the primary video and stuff like that, maybe it'd be cool to go to the 60s. I'm not great with the 60s. I consider it like a side interest, but there's some stuff that I do find incredibly compelling, and I'm trying to up my understanding of. One figure who I am just fascinated with, and I would say he's one of my favorite historical figures to study, is Malcolm X. He is this wonderfully complex figure that I never really got to learn that much about growing up. In American schools, you typically don't learn too much about Malcolm X. When you're learning about the civil rights movement, especially in public schools, in my experience, it's very Martin Luther King Jr. focused. He's a really good figure to look up to, and especially if you're teaching kids pretty young about the civil rights movement. A figure like Malcolm X may be a little bit too gray for them. It might be good to teach about Malcolm X a little bit later on when they're able to process that sort of stuff. Martin Luther King Jr., being very pacifistic, there's something very easy to talk about when it comes to his ideology. Malcolm X, he's a little bit more difficult, and I'd love to talk about him a little bit while we check out this interview out of the Rhode Island Historical Society archives, which is really cool because it's my home state. So, and I haven't seen this interview before, so I'm very excited about this. This is 1961, so we often find different Malcolm X's depending on what time we're talking about. So here we have Malcolm X, who's deep within the Nation of Islam, which is this Muslim group in the United States that follows a man named Elijah Muhammad, who is kind of the prophet of their time, and his word is kind of law. Their ideology is a little hard to get into all at once. We might do a little bit more on that as this video progresses, but he's kind of deep within that right now, and he's kind of the representative of them. He's incredibly charismatic. He's pulling in a lot of younger black men into the Nation of Islam, and you'll find that he's a very political figure in a group that doesn't really want to be political. Like the Nation of Islam, they want to be a religious group. Malcolm X, he can't help but be a very political figure, and we're going to learn a little bit about his ideology today. And hopefully in his own words, and I won't have to editorialize too much, but we'll see. The way Malcolm X interviews goes, sometimes he'll find the interviewer pretty hostile to him and kind of coming in with assumptions about him as this violent, anti-white, like just this guy's basically the black KKK, when I think that's an incredibly unfair characterization. There's a lot of problems with the Nation of Islam, but I would not say black KKK is a fair descriptor. So let's get started with the video and learn a little bit about our friend. I love this little part where it has the little code there.
Could you tell us your purpose of being here in Providence for the second time?
The Muslims here in America who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad have our annual convention in Chicago every year, and I'm traveling around the country for the purpose of seeing that the groups that are going by caravan are properly organized and properly informed.
We have a...
So when Malcolm X joined the Nation of Islam, they were still a pretty small group relative to after his big impact. His charisma brought in so many people that they were able to expand incredibly. And you'll find that he's a wonderful speaker. You'll find that he's very firm, and he's a very powerful black role model for people who are generally fed up. So yeah, like it's him being kind of the ambassador to their convention thing that they're doing. Like, yeah, that would make sense. He would be the voice of that.
Mosque here in the city of Providence?
Yes, there is a Muslim mosque here in Providence where meetings are held every Thursday night and every Sunday night.
Well, we never hear anything from them. How come?
Well, I religiously believe that the only way the black man's condition can be corrected in America, politically, socially, economically, and otherwise, is if we do it ourselves. And our religion teaches us and gives us the incentive, the ingenuity, the know-how to separate ourselves from white society and try and do for ourselves in our own society what the white man has done for himself and his kind in his society. And many of your...
So we're going to end up having a Malcolm X who is very conflicted about what he's saying right now in the future. But at this point, the Nation of Islam is kind of a separatist group. Kind of segregationist. So you got to think, like, segregation is still a thing. Black people and white people in America, they still have, like, black zones and white zones. Everything is kind of blocked off. There are people who just don't want them to be interacting. So we haven't gotten integration on paper yet. Even today, we don't even have, like the ideal of integration, but not even on paper yet. So that's something to note when it comes to Malcolm X making these arguments. He's not necessarily arguing for moving backwards. He's talking about, like, a different route from Martin Luther King. And this, you can probably see why this might be hard to teach to a kid, because this guy is basically arguing for segregation type stuff. Like, the Nation of Islam, they want to, like, break off from the United States and have kind of their own independent black nation within the United States that's self-governing. And one of the big problems is that there doesn't seem to be any real plan to get there. They always talk about that, and then Malcolm X eventually is going to be like, yeah, we don't seem to actually have a plan of doing this, and he's going to get frustrated by that because he's so political, he's so active, he wants to move and do stuff, but they seem like they're kind of just gesturing to him. So he has to make these arguments, and he's such a loyal and good spokesperson. And I don't know if he's doubting it yet. I think it's going to take a little time before he has that level of doubt in his mind about it. But you got to see that eventually, a lot of these arguments, he's going to be like, yeah, there was never really a plan for this sort of stuff. Nothing tangible. And that's frustrating to somebody who's like such an amazing political thinker like him.
Of the so-called Negro integrationists who have looked forward toward the day when they could intermingle with whites, they think that it's outrageous now that it appears that they're just about to make it into the promised land of integration, as Martin Luther King calls it. They think that we're almost traitors to step in at this point and say that we don't want integration.
You say separation instead of segregation. Can this be accomplished, do you think, really?
The black man and the white man.
It's kind of it's kind of segregation. We're kind of playing words. There is something a little bit different about that, but in a way, he's still arguing for like a form of segregation. What's fundamentally different is that this black nation would be self-governing. But yeah, principally, he even has like something that he would regret much later on. He ends up like meeting with the KKK about this stuff because they both want them to be separate, and it's like, okay, let's work together. He ends up being like super embarrassed by that stuff. But yeah, that's what he's arguing for at this point. And I can understand why somebody in Malcolm's position would feel a little hostility towards Martin Luther King. There is something like on the face of it, you look at like pacifists, and I personally consider myself to be a pacifist, but I can understand how you look at it and it feels naive. And maybe there is some naivete there because it's not like we got the Civil Rights Act passed and everything was hunky-dory. Things were not fine. And there's still progress that needs to be made. So I understand why somebody would think like, okay, yeah, he's naive. But then he comes out with this aggressive rhetoric, kind of taking things in an opposite direction. And he's not making a ton of friends in the civil rights movement. Let's just say that. I don't think he necessarily hates Martin Luther King, and I think he even softens on him a little bit more towards the end of his life, because Malcolm X is not going to make it through the decade. He's going to be assassinated as well.
Man in America is already separated. The fact that you have second-class citizenship is political separation. The fact that you have black people are the last hired and the first fired is economic separation. The fact that you have discrimination is social separation. All we're asking, since separation is practiced, although it's not preached, we're asking that America practice what it preaches or preach what it practices. And whereas up to now, the white community benefits, is the sole benefactor from the form of segregation that exists, we want it separate so that the black man can be benefited as well as the white be benefited. And we think that it will solve the race problem. This is just, it doesn't involve hypocrisy. It's recognizing factors as they are, and that's the only way to solve the problem.
Mr. X?
There's something really good about this interviewer that I really appreciate. He's really letting Malcolm talk. And so often when you find people like Malcolm who would be considered a political radical, there's a lot of political radicals in the 60s, but he's just one brand of them. It's so easy for interviewers to kind of jump down their throat because it's really generally controversial to even like have this conversation. A lot of the people who are more anti-Malcolm X would just take his words and not have him on personally. They just take his words and spin them or whatever. But there is something very brave about how this interviewer is just kind of letting him get his stuff out there. I don't know. I guess we live in a time where I saw I think it was a Newsmax clip like yesterday of like somebody mildly criticizing Donald Trump, and then the conversation just shut down. So I look at conversations like that and I'm just like, well, that's pretty lame. That's a crappy interviewer right there. And I look at something like this and I really do respect that approach. I don't know who the interviewer is, but I enjoy the best interviewers are the ones where you hardly notice that they're there.
Actually, you for total separation right to the point where you might even want your own state?
Yes, we who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad have been taught that total separation is the only way to solve the race problem in this country.
Do you speak at all on anything of a political nature?
Well, it depends upon what you mean by politics. We are a religious group. We're religiously motivated. But when in our religion we're taught that we should have freedom, justice, and equality. Some people place freedom, justice, and equality in a political category. But just as Moses in the Bible, his entire message was a message of separation and freedom for his people. And despite the fact that he was seeking freedom for his people and a land, by the way, for his people, Moses is never represented by anyone other than as a religious leader. He's never called a political leader. And since our people today in America are in the same condition that Moses found his people in, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is a modern counterpart of Moses among us, we look upon him as a man of God, a messenger of God, and a religious man in the same light and in the same category and at the same level with Moses.
I didn't even know he was going to be approaching this question, so I'm actually really excited about that because I mentioned that he's a very political figure in a religious group, and I kind of like his spin. I think Malcolm X is inherently political. The way he thinks is so inherently political. From a religious perspective, he feels inadequate, and he's constantly still learning and developing, and eventually he's going to break off. Shortly before his death, he's going to break off from the Nation of Islam. And one element beyond some personal issues with Elijah Muhammad, we could of course get to that in a little bit, beyond that, there's his, I guess, religious ideology starting to develop, and him starting to get a better understanding of Islam and stuff, and that helps him to realize, oh, there's something iffy in this organization. And as he does that, he becomes more of an independent religious thinker. And who knows what he would have been like if he lived a little longer, because he really didn't live too long after his political transformation. One could even say that he was killed mid political transformation, and there is so much more that could have happened, but we just don't know where he would have ended up if he had a little bit more time. He wasn't that old at all, really, by the time he was killed.
I was thinking basically of the present Congo situation and its political overtones in many respects. Do you have any comment on the Congo situation?
Whenever the Congo problem, the Angola problem, and the Algeria problem, all of these problems are discussed in the United Nations, race is basically at the bottom of all. And it's a problem that you can't ignore here in America, and that we as Muslims can't ignore here in America, because as these dark countries in Africa gain their independence and they emerge and they rise, it's causing a fall of the European nations. As they become stronger economically, the European nations become weaker economically. It has necessitated their creating this common market in Europe.
Malcolm X believed in a kind of Pan-Africanism, which is a very interesting concept, and there are different ways of applying the philosophy of Pan-Africanism, but it's just kind of a sense of intangible unity from people of African descent, wherever you're from, despite the fact that he's in America, his loyalty to black men, it doesn't just end at black Americans. It goes beyond that. It goes back to Africa. It goes to black people in all countries around the world. It's just kind of this idea of having this sort of ethnic unity, because black people across the world are so traditionally oppressed that they should kind of have a certain degree of unity, and if they're not united with one another, then like who's gonna look out for them, really? And still, this is the 60s. Let's be real. It's even worse in the 60s.
The common market, or the need
World's blowing
for a
up right
common
now.
market by Europeans, was created by the freedom or the independence of the African nations and the Asian nations. So although Islam is our religion and we're religiously motivated, we can never lose sight of the fact that race is playing, not only here in America, but also on a worldwide basis, on an international basis.
You happened to mention the last time you were here, I believe it was last April, that your group was not a violent group, but you went on from there. Could you repeat this?
This is going to be interesting because the Malcolm X, he gets this bad rep as like this guy who advocated violence against white people, which I think the Black Panther Party also gets this bad rep, kind of like in a way that's not properly contextualized. Like, you need to understand like the context around what he's saying. But it's very easy to take a Malcolm X quote out of context. I'm going to let him talk here, and then we'll talk more about it.
We're not a violent group in this sense. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us never to be the aggressor and to always respect and recognize and obey law and law enforcement officers. And he teaches us always to be in the right, religiously seek to be in the right. But then he teaches us if we're ever attacked, we have the right, the religious right, to defend ourselves. And any act of violence that Muslims have ever been involved in has always been a reaction to an aggressive act that has been committed against us. We don't.
Yeah, like I consider myself to be more aligned with like a pacifistic way of thinking, but this is important because Malcolm X, I think he's pretty consistent on this issue, that when he talks about violence, he's pretty much always referring to it as a response to violence committed upon you. Like, he's never just like, go kill your white neighbor who never did anything bad to you. He's not saying anything like that. And sometimes people try to make the point as if he is, like, what he's saying is just that bad. No, he's saying, like, if people act violently towards you, then sure, you can absolutely respond. And that's kind of a philosophy that's picked up by the Black Panther Party, who may have been a bit more aggressive on that point, but there is like this sort of okay, we have police brutality, it's a problem, and we are going to arm ourselves just to make sure that if the police start attacking people in the community, we are able to defend ourselves. They're not just like, let's go out and shoot random cops. That's not what it's saying at all. It is very response-driven, and that's something, while it's not how I would conduct politics, one can sort of understand how somebody who feels like their back is against the wall would say, like, I'm not taking this option off the table. Like I said, it's not how I would do politics, but I think that extra element needs to be appreciated when it comes to understanding Malcolm X. It's very easy for a white guy who grew up in the suburbs to look at Malcolm X and be like, why aren't you just more like Martin Luther King? But you think of all the violence that was enacted upon the more peaceful side of the civil rights movement. And I think that's an example of why I can appreciate Malcolm X's feelings on this, because, like, when you are legitimately being oppressed, often through violence, Americans are always talking about, like, yeah, if our government starts to oppress us, we're going to rise up or whatever. But then you see black Muslims do it, and I think that's one of the big reasons why this is an especially scary group to people at the time because, first of all, they're black and they're Muslim. These are things that are considered like, ooh, over there to the average suburban white person.
Endorse passive resistance. We don't endorse nonviolence. We don't endorse any kind of peaceful suffering. In fact, we don't endorse anything that's advocated by Martin Luther King that has a tendency to strip and disarm our people in this country at a time when the segregationists in the South are not disarmed. And we think that it is wrong to teach black people in America to be nonviolent at a time when someone is not teaching the white man in America also to be nonviolent.
Have you had any recent incidents?
No.
When it comes to political violence, like, I don't think there's never a place for political violence. I don't know if I'm brave enough to be the person to perform the political violence, but I don't think it's never warranted. If there's like no way within the system that you exist within that like all your options for political dissent are just shut down within a political system, that's when violence is going to come into play. If governments don't give people the means to peacefully protest or peacefully petition their government or peacefully create some sort of a change, you've given people no options. And I think Malcolm X and by extension, like Huey Newton and the leaders of the future Black Panther Party, who are going to take a lot from Malcolm X specifically, not just the Nation of Islam, but Malcolm X's rhetoric specifically. I think that's how a lot of them feel. They feel like they're backed against the wall. They feel like they're not given enough freedom to do this and enact this change peacefully within the system. Because especially once you get to the Black Panther Party, and they've witnessed the assassination of both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, two people who really tried to make some genuine change. Did not actually end up committing acts of violence, but they end up being killed under, okay, it's pretty gosh darn suspicious. Let's just be real. Yeah, so that ends up happening. Of course they're going to feel like there's no means of doing it this peacefully, because like the people who actually did try to make a change, they had violent acts upon them. Freaking BS.
Oh, not too recent. However, we had a situation in Monroe, Louisiana, where in our mosque, our religious services were invaded by the police who were trying to stop the spread of Islam in Monroe, Louisiana by frightening the so-called Negroes in that area. And they entered our mosque, they broke into our mosque, armed with riot guns, nightclubs, tear gas, and things of that sort, and a fight did follow. And although the Muslims who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad don't believe in carrying any arms whatsoever, Allah did bless us to hospitalize the police who illegally and unjustly and immorally invaded our religious services.
That sort of stuff happened all the time in the 60s, not just to black people, but like the radical left in general. A lot of people in the anti-war movement and that sort of stuff. There's a lot of, you'd get like a suspicious raid on a mosque or like a meeting place of some sort of radical leftist organization, and they'll do that in order to like break things up. And it not even just that. Let's talk about like the gay rights movement. A big part of Stonewall was driven by just unwarranted police raids and cracking down on people who were acting peacefully, which pretty fricked up if you ask me.
You have a book here called Anti-Slavery by Dwight Lowell Dumond. Could you tell us anything about this?
Yes, this book was authored by a University of Michigan professor. It was published by the University of Michigan Press. It cost $20. And in my opinion, every white person in America, as well as black person in America, should read this book. They would get a better understanding of the machinery that was used to strip the black man who was brought to the to the West from the East of his culture, of his accomplishments, of his civilization, and relegated to the role of an animal. It tells how he was dehumanized. In fact,
I haven't read that book, but I would like to. Hold on one second. Let me go back for just a second. I would like to see if I can find a physical copy of this. I don't know. Just gonna screenshot that real quick while I have it here, you know.
Of his civilization and relegated to the role of an animal. It tells how he was dehumanized. In fact, it actually spells out the crime that was committed by the slave trader, the slave maker, and the slave master, which is primarily responsible for the condition and the race problem that exists in America today. And one of the best statements in the book, in my opinion, is this professor or scientist points out that second-class citizenship is nothing but a modern version of slavery, which means that according to him, his definition, slavery still exists. 20 million black people here in America are still slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War were fought for nothing. And because it was approached in that day in a hypocritical way, although Lincoln was faced with the problem, all of the presidents since him, including Kennedy today, is still faced with the same problem, because no honest effort has ever been made to solve it, especially by the politicians. No honest effort has ever...
Oh, I think that's it. Oh, this is the... I think this is the one that I wanted to do next, so that's perfect.
Malcolm.
We will... when was this one? This was I think this was 65, perhaps 1965. You can see why Malcolm X was so popular. First of all, there's something about how like untimid he was in his approach to discussing political and religious issues. He was always so firm, and it's amazing how firm he was, given the fact that he had so much self-doubt. You read the autobiography of Malcolm X, which he didn't like physically write, but he dictated to Alex Haley, who what was the book that he wrote? Did he write 12 Years a Slave? I don't remember if that was him or not. Sorry, that's off the top of my head. I'm sure you can look it up if you care enough. But he dictated the book to Alex Haley, and despite the fact that he tried to frame himself in a particular light, you can see a little bit of his insecurity come out, and in a lot of ways he is honest about how uncertain he could be at times about his ideology, while he is so firm, and that makes him so easy to follow. You see him, he like stares daggers through you. His eyes are so there's something that feels so strong in them. There's something there. Here we have a slightly different Malcolm X. This is not the Malcolm X that you will typically see clips of. He's not. You usually see the clean-shaven, stern Malcolm X. This, I think, in a lot of the interviews that I've seen during this time, he comes off as a little bit more gentle, and he's in the middle of a huge political transformation. He leaves the Nation of Islam. He's trying to find his own, I guess, political ideology and his place in the civil rights movement, because, you know, the Nation of Islam was kind of everything. He gave his all to that group. Even the royalties to his autobiography, that was supposed to be going to the Nation of Islam too. So there's so much there that's just so interesting to talk about. Let's hear what he has here.
X.
Yeah, okay, January 1965. So he's getting close to the end. Malcolm X is not going to live too long after this. He ends up getting gunned down during a speech, seemingly by members of the Nation of Islam, though there's plenty of theories of cooperation with the FBI, which I wouldn't be surprised about. Like any federal agency, if any of them were like complicit in it, or often they'll place in agents in these radical left groups and try to push them towards action that they can be arrested for and that sort of stuff. A lot of federal agencies partook in that as well. And it also seemed like when Malcolm X was shot, there was no rush to get him taken care of. So a lot of people think that the police might have been a little complicit in it as well, or at least they were like, okay, we're going to be a little hands off right here, and what happens happens. I don't know, we didn't have anything to do with it, we didn't shoot him, but we didn't try very hard to help him.
Sir, what's the real reason why you two men split? Is it merely ideological, or is it personality? What else?
Probably personality. It was not the statement that originally was given by the movement when we split. More personality than anything else.
You've called people like Martin Luther King, who just got a Nobel Peace Prize, an Uncle Tom. Is this correct, first?
Well, I'd rather say that in the States, there's a law that has recently been passed, or a decision handed down by the court, wherein if you call someone an Uncle Tom, they can sue you for libel.
Well,
so I never refer to them as Uncle Toms. I would say that Uncle Martin is my friend.
Uncle Martin is your friend, yet you would disagree.
You see how he's like softened so much over the years? And I think that comes from his own insecurity. I think when you do go through so much political change at once, and I've had things like this, nothing near what Malcolm X had, but I've had moments where I've questioned my political ideology and stepped back, and for a while I'm just like, I don't know anything. It brings out a lot of humility in a person, and that's what I always got reading about Malcolm X during this incomplete transition that he was having.
Agree with his approach to what he wants to accomplish?
Definitely. If his approach would bring about what the black man in America needs to completely eliminate the problem that we have, I would say well and good. But I very much doubt that anyone who adopts the approach that Martin Luther King has been teaching to our people in that country can point to any meaningful gains that has actually served to solve the problem.
Black Muslim.
Yeah, that sounds like a condemnation, and it is, but it's noticeably softer. There is definitely a change in tone. Like, before, it didn't even seem like he was hoping for Martin Luther King to succeed. He actually does seem like he wants Martin Luther King to succeed, but he just isn't buying it right now. Still thinks it's just a bit naive.
Have sometimes, whether you have or not, and I think probably you have sometimes, it seemed to me, been preaching hate to meet hate.
I don't advocate any kind of hate.
But there's a lot of talk that sounds...
This is a very normal approach for an interview to have with Malcolm X. It's always like, you hate white people. But I listen to his interviews. He seems like he's very careful. Like, every once in a while he says something like off the cuff that might be a little questionable, but he never seemed like he hated white people. And I feel like people might have been projecting kind of an insecurity towards him. Like, he's saying something that's uncomfortable in general. He's kind of going against the system as we know it, and he's unapologetic and just generally loud about it. And maybe it comes off as hateful. I never saw it like that. I don't know how. I can't put myself in that time and like be a person in that time hearing it. It's so easy in hindsight for me to be like, I really don't see that. But it's also hard for me to say what I would have thought if I was in that time.
Very much like it.
No, I think that the guilt complex of the American white man is so profound until when you begin to analyze the real condition of the black man in America, instead of the American white man eliminating the causes that create that condition, he tries to cover it up by accusing his accusers of teaching hate. But actually, they're just exposing him for being responsible for what exists.
Well, that's something of an argument, but I've heard
That's very well communicated right there. That's kind of what I'm thinking a lot of the time. A lot of the time when I see that. It's not like Malcolm X has never said anything questionable. He made statements like implying that he was happy that JFK got assassinated and stuff like that. That's pretty fricked up. Let's be real there. So it's not like he's never said anything messed up. And that happened before this. So if this guy is looking at Malcolm X saying like, I'm trying to think of what the quote was. He said it was like something like, it's kind of like chickens coming home to roost, and I like when chickens come home to roost. It was something of that sort. It did seem like he thought, yeah, he might have kind of had it coming by taking part in this system. And you know what? If you want to make an argument for that he should have done, that JFK should have done a lot more to help black people when he was in office, absolutely. Like, I think every president of this time, ideally, we would have liked it if they did more. So, like, I can see why Malcolm X wouldn't like him, but yeah, that's just the optics of it were really bad, and I could see how it could turn, like, an interviewer against him.
Speeches made by some of the people of your group, I think I've heard you make speeches. It seemed to me that you were advocating what I would have to describe, I think, as violence to meet the serious injuries that have been done your people, with which I totally agree.
I don't call that violence. I don't in any way.
You know, this guy's he's not the worst. Like, he hit him with the standard question, but like that's more than most people would be willing to give Malcolm X. I think Malcolm X is in an interesting place right now, and I think they're willing to give him more the benefit of the doubt because he's left the Nation of Islam, and the mainstream media definitely does not like the Nation of Islam. So that split actually puts him in a place where he has another opportunity to be a little bit more sympathetic than he once was, but he's also not in like that Martin Luther King category, where Martin Luther King, he's generally well liked by at least a lot of moderates.
Encourage black people to go out and initiate acts of aggression indiscriminately against whites. But I do believe that the black man in the United States, and any human being anywhere, is well within his right to do whatever is necessary, by any means necessary, to protect his life and property, especially in a country where the federal government itself has proven that it is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of those human beings.
Just before Pierre takes it, you've got a pretty good fighter and the world's heavyweight champion lined up with you to help out. Yes.
Ooh.
Well, Mr. X, if I guess I call you that.
So we're talking. They're talking about Muhammad Ali right there. Once known as Cassius Clay, changes his name to Cassius X for a brief period when he joins the Nation of Islam, because when you join the Nation of Islam, you lose your surname and you receive an X in its place. That's why Malcolm X is Malcolm X. I believe the name he took on after Malcolm X was El Malik al-Shabazz, something like that. Like his family, who are still around, their last name Shabazz now. It's not X or Little, which would be his name before he was Malcolm X. He was Malcolm Little. I want to double check that. I always get his final name, not his last name. I always get that wrong, and I don't want to deceive y'all. I want to give you his proper title. And I guess this would be his real name by the end. It's... Where is it? Oh, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. I always forget the Hajj. This came after he went on his Hajj, which is where he visited Mecca and had kind of his own... Because if you're a Muslim, it's kind of a religious duty, if you can, at some point in your life, to visit Mecca. And apparently it's a very meaningful experience, and it meant a lot to him. And he, I guess it played a big role in his political transformation, or at least it was a natural continuation of it.
Is that the proper appellation, yes. Mr. X? I'm wondering if you still believe, as I think you certainly did at the time you were allied to the black Muslim movement, in a segregated black nation
No.
in North America.
I don't believe in any form of segregation or any form of racism. I'm against any form of segregation and against racism.
Am I right in saying that the black Muslim movement, which you have left, did believe in that?
Well, Elijah Muhammad taught his followers that the only solution was a separate state for black people. And as long as I thought he genuinely believed that himself, I believed in him and believed in his solution. But when I began to doubt that he himself believed that that was feasible, and I saw no kind of action designed to bring it into existence or bring it about, then I turned in a different direction.
Are you still...
You see the amount of difference that we have going on here, and there's a lot of reason for the separation between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad. One of the interesting potential reasons here, it's one of the juicier reasons. There's ideological differences, like Malcolm is developing as a religious thinker. He's thinking a little bit more for himself, and he's starting to see contradictions. He's starting to look into the Nation of Islam's history and starting to see things that may be being distorted by Elijah Muhammad, because Elijah Muhammad was not their first prophet. There was a man who came before. I think it was Fard Muhammad. There's a man who, he came before, and he's starting to see that Elijah Muhammad may have changed some of Fard Muhammad's ideas in a way that would favor him, so that seems a little bit cynical. Also, Elijah Muhammad was caught having affairs, a handful apparently, with a lot of women who were his secretaries. These are things he absolutely was not supposed to be doing. And one of those women was an ex-girlfriend of Malcolm's. That might have had an extra element to it, but that was one of the things that deeply bugged him, and that's where he kind of saw that Elijah Muhammad may not have been completely genuine. There was something a little bit disingenuous there, or it kind of broke the facade, because he was always like more than human to Malcolm, and when he saw that he wasn't infallible, I guess that opened the gate a little bit more for him to question things a little bit more. So there's a natural snowball effect that would come from that.
Still a Muslim yourself?
Oh, yes. I'm a Muslim. I believe in the religion of Islam, which believes in brotherhood, complete brotherhood of all people. But at the same time that I believe in this brotherhood,
I believe he's a Sunni Muslim, but I'm not sure. I believe he would fall under the category of Sunni at this point.
I don't believe in forcing my desire for brotherhood upon those who
don't quote me on anything ever.
I think the Christians would say that they also believed in brotherhood. What did you say to that?
I'd say they believe in it, but don't practice it.
Well, that'd be a pretty good answer.
Sir, when the muezzin goes up in the minaret twice a day, he cries to the world, "There is but one God, and he is Allah." Do you deny that there is a Christian God?
You see how, like, this guy has no freaking clue what Islam is? Because, like, anybody who knows, like, even the slightest thing about Islam knows that it's the same God. That's the thing. Like, Allah just means God, and it is the actual Christian God. It's like the Quran is essentially the third book in their chronology. They acknowledge the Bible. They acknowledge, but like, this guy's coming in with his own assumptions here.
He is Allah. Do you
hope Malcolm owns him for this?
Christian God?
The muezzin does this 5 times a day.
5 times, and I only heard him twice.
Well, you were fortunate to hear him twice. But he does this 5 times a day, and the same God that he says that he expresses the existence of is the God that the Christians profess to believe in themselves, and the God that the Jews believe in. One God, the creator of the universe. The Muslim.
Yeah, this is just like Muhammad would have been considered like the next prophet. Like, Moses was a prophet, Jesus was a prophet, and Muhammad's a prophet. Like, it's just a progression along the same story. Like, this is the third book. And you could branch off into the other way. You go from the Bible to, like, the Book of Mormon, but it acknowledges the stuff that goes before it. And I feel like this guy I don't think he's being cynical. I think this is genuinely something that a lot of people don't know.
Muslims believe in the God that created the universe, and I think the Christians do, and the Jews do. Now, as long as all of them are talking about the Creator, the Jews may call him Jehovah, and Christians may have another name for him. Those who are Arabic-speaking refer to him as Allah. Well, we believe in the same God.
Now, as the Muslim religion advances in the United States, are you modernizing it or sticking with the old faiths? For example, the complete segregation of the sexes.
I think that everything today on this earth is being modernized. Religious principles and practices, as well as political and other things.
Now, when you went to Mecca...
That's a very good question by this guy, though. That is something that I would genuinely want to know from Malcolm X if I were conducting this interview. A very interesting thing about a lot of these black civil rights groups, a lot of them do have kind of this ideology that is based around like kind of reclaiming this abstract idea of black masculinity. That's something that kind of Malcolm X was pushing in a sort of subtle way, and that's something that the Black Panther Party builds upon a little bit. And the relationship with women is sometimes interesting. Sometimes they're able to be involved. Like in the case of the Black Panther Party, they are able to hold pretty important positions and they can be heavily involved, but it doesn't mean that individual members don't have like these patriarchal thoughts as well. Even if somebody at the top, even if Huey Newton himself says like, women are 100% equal, treat them as your equal, it doesn't mean that people down the ranks aren't going to have their own little prejudice. That is a question that I would love to have asked Malcolm X. I'm kind of glad this guy did. He goes from kind of a very easy question to have learned the answer to without having to ask Malcolm X to like a genuinely very good question.
This is a very sacred and forbidden city. I tried to get to Mecca myself and certainly didn't make it, not being a Muslim. But how would they accept you as one? You're an American. There are few American Muslims.
This is true, and by being an American and not having not being able to speak the Arabic language, I did strike a snag, a very serious snag, but I was fortunate to have been pretty well known by the officials in Arabia, and they knew too that I had accepted Orthodox Islam. It had been highly publicized in the paper, and I became a guest of the state. I was a guest of Prince Faisal, the present King Faisal.
The fact that he was treated so well on his trip to Mecca, I think that was also incredibly meaningful to him and really opening up his view of not just Islam, but the world. There's something about when you are treated with kindness like that. I think it really can open your view of things. And he's already kind of opening his view on the whole world because he's going through so many changes. He's questioning so much of what he once knew, so...
Faisal, and they made it possible for me to go before the committee, Hajj committee or Hajj court, who examines you and asks you questions about your belief, and if you pass it, then you are okay to go to Mecca. But it's
you would
true.
have to have a translator then.
I had one.
Yeah, Betty?
Mr. X, since you're split with the Black Muslim movement,
This is like a panel.
you formed your own group,
Yes.
and also you say that you don't believe that Martin Luther King has solutions. What are your solutions?
Well, first, we formed two groups. The split resulted in the formation of two groups. The black Muslim, those who left the Black Muslim movement regrouped into what has now become known as the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, which is strictly religious, based upon the religion as it is taught in Mecca and Cairo and other centers of Islamic religious learning. Then realizing that our problem in America, that we are black Americans and we have a problem that goes beyond religion, we formed a group known as the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And the objective of this organization, it's non-religious, number one. Any Negro can belong to it. And the objective of that organization is to bring about a condition that will guarantee respect and recognition of the 22 million black Americans as human beings.
Now, this is very laudable, but how?
Well, by any means necessary.
He always lacked the answer, I would say. I think that's still hard for him. He's still trying to figure this out. So I think I like that she's pressing him on it. That's an aggressive interview tactic right there. He was definitely good at building coalitions. He was definitely very good at building enthusiasm and stuff. But his exact solution, it never feels like it's fully articulated, because I don't think it's there yet. Would he have come to some sort of an understanding, some sort of a solution? Perhaps if he was given a little more time, he's going to die pretty soon. He's going to be assassinated pretty soon after this. So maybe if he had a little bit more time, he would have come to it. But I think at this point, he's a little bit unprepared for that question. But I like that she's asking it. I can't tell if he's squirming or not, or if he feels good about the answers he's giving. Let me go back.
Respect and recognition of the 22 million black Americans as human beings.
Now, this is very laudable, but how?
Well, by any means necessary. We feel that the problem, number one, of the black man in America is beyond America's ability to solve. It's a human problem, not an American problem or a Negro problem. And as a human problem or a world problem, we...
An interesting thing that I've talked about the Black Panthers and how they're a bit inspired by Malcolm X. I think they had a really good approach to community building and that sort of stuff, and I think he would have found that stuff to be really admirable, how they created education programs, free breakfast programs for kids and stuff like that. There's a lot that they did for community building, and it became a little bit more okay, let's see what change we can make to improve the lives of black people kind of on the ground level, because the government's not going to do it. So we're going to step in and take care of that for them. Which I think is a very interesting idea, but it doesn't fix the institutional problems. And that's always one of the issues that they have. And Martin Luther King has sort of that veneer of respectability that he can kind of step into that field a little bit and make some gains. He is able to make some gains, at least on paper. Significant gains are made, and I think just the echo of his impact has continued to make great gains, though I don't consider us to be quite at the ideal yet. I think there is kind of a mixture here, because it is good to acknowledge, like, Malcolm X, he'd probably be more like, what can we do for black people right now? I think Martin Luther King, he was a bit more patient. I think he was willing to take that, like, one step at a time. I feel like Malcolm X, he always felt like he wanted something quick and impactful, but something that wasn't exactly there. I'm not sure. Because when he's asked questions like this, it never feels direct.
Feel that it should be taken out of the jurisdiction of the United States government and the United States courts and taken into the United Nations in the same manner that the problems of the black man in South Africa, Angola, and other parts of the world, and even the way they're trying to bring the problems of the Jews in Russia into the United Nations because of violation of human rights. We believe that our problem is one not of violation of civil rights, but a violation of human rights.
I forgot about his arguments about the United Nations. That is a pretty that is kind of an answer to my concern in the previous thing, though I do think that's in a similar way to Martin Luther King, maybe a little bit naive to think that all the change can be made just there, because, like, there are definitely limitations to the United Nations. They can try to flex their muscles all they can, but this is the United States. If the United States decides to defy them, what are they going to do? Are we going to invade the United States and liberate the black people of America? It's very unlikely that they would have the political will to do something like that. Yeah, it's just difficult. Maybe there's a means they could have done it, but it doesn't seem super practical. Personally, I don't know. I could be wrong.
Not only are we denied the right to be a citizen in the United States, we're denied the right to be a human being.
Mr. X, may I thank you very much for coming on our program and perhaps clearing away some of the cobwebs of misconception that some of us might have had about your belief. And I think you're a very sincere man, and it takes a lot of courage to admit a former belief is wrong, and we congratulate you for that and the service you performed tonight in giving us your views. Thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you.
I think that was a pretty good panel. Like, for the time, for 1960s, like, I would expect something more hostile, but it does make sense when you think about the political transformation he's going through right now, the very public political transformation, the fact that he's breaking off of a group that they probably hate more than Malcolm X himself. They would probably rather him be an ally than an enemy. I think. I would hope. I don't think you want to make an enemy out of Malcolm X. That guy had some political will. That was fun. That was fun. I wasn't expecting to talk as much as I did on the subject, but I think there was a lot of interesting conversation, a lot to like dig into from a sort of cultural history thing where we got to make these little inferences, and maybe they're a little imperfect, but it's fun to go through this sort of like real-time analysis. I think there's something really fun about that. I'd like to do some more stuff like this at some point in the future, because it's so real. The history feels so tangible when you're doing stuff like this. This is why I love the primary sources, but I just never get to work with primary video, so this is refreshing. All right. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, like or something, I don't know. Thank you, and I will see you guys in the very near future with another video. All right.